Well, yes, welcome everyone to GeoHug. So before we kick off today's session, I'd just like to take this time to acknowledge the traditional lands which we're all coming from today. I'm here on the beautiful lands of the Gadigal, of the people of the Aurora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and future. So I'm thrilled to have Stuart Smith back with us today. So Stuart has more than 30 years of global exploration experience with an emphasis on arc environments and in particular porphyry copper gold deposits. So with his extensive experience, it is going to be unreal to learn from him today about exploration area selection at the global 2 belt scale, evaluating multi-layer technical and non-technical risk to maximize exploration probabilities. So it is going to be an awesome session. Hope you all enjoy it. Please use the chat. We'll be opening up the floor for discussion at the end. And yes, thank you so much, Stuart, for joining. It's wonderful having you.
So, as Jess said, what I thought I'd talk about today is some of my views, and these are, I'll be fully transparent, these are my personal views around area selection at that sort of at the big picture scale and evaluating the multiple levels of risk that we as exploration managers and explorationists need to evaluate in our work to maximise our probabilities of success. So hopefully we can get some discussion going at the end. I don't expect everyone's going to agree with me. I'd be super disappointed if everyone did. So please put your thinking caps on and see what you think of how I approach this sort of scale of exploration thinking. Firstly, I will, right up front, I'll apologise for the obvious porphyry bias in what I'm talking about here. It's because, yeah, for better or worse, I'm a bit one-dimensional. I spent most of my career in that part of that space, so a lot of what I'm talking about does have a porphyry bias, but I do think a lot of it is fairly transferable as well, and I'll attempt to bring some concepts of that in as well as we go along. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'll start with just a couple of slides around terminology, just to put us all on the same page, and it's just my view, the way I use certain terms. There's no right answer here, it's just, but I want to make sure that everyone actually understands how I use certain things that can be used in different ways by different people. I'll have a few slides then that talk to some exploration success case studies that I think help to frame the second part of the talk, which is really about this concept of multi-layer risk and what we deal with in our exploration decision making. And then I'll sort of wrap up with a couple of slides that talk to how I go about assessing that risk and how I go about managing those risks to help exploration people make better decisions. So first up, just in terms of what I'm talking about, this sort of area selection concept. So essentially, this is my view of the exploration life cycle, moving from the earliest stage, which in my view is area selection, right through to sort of feasibility studies. And to me, the area selection is a term that's applicable to whether you're looking to pick up large tracts of ground and mount super early stage greenfields exploration, or if you're also just on the hunt for discrete projects and prospects, etc. You have to go through very similar processes to select the areas that you think give you the best opportunity to achieve your goals. So in the way I think about this, the goal of area selection is to predict project scale areas that hold high probabilities for the presence of an undiscovered deposit that fulfills your investment criteria. So that's sort of how I think of area selection. And to me, if your area selection processes are poor, then your exploration success probabilities approach zero. So in my mind, this area selection piece is super critical to successful exploration. And if you want to think of some different words there for that, simply put, if you select an area where there is no ore body, you cannot find one. So therefore, if your area selection is poor, your exploration success probabilities approach zero. So it's a super critical part of the business, and I think a lot of organisations don't do it particularly well. So having got that out of the way, I just want to talk, there's one concept I'd like to broach here as well that I think is really important when we're thinking about exploration area selection processes, and that is that mineral deposits of all sorts are relatively rare beasts. and particularly if we're looking for those that are potentially economic. They're distributed in an extremely heterogeneous manner in both in time and space, and any effective area selection strategy needs to take account for that. And so I've got two examples here, one spatial, one temporal. And on the map on the right is a map of most of northern Chile, and it's an exemplar of this extremely heterogeneously distributed nature of mineral deposits, metal deposits. So Chile occupies about 0.5% of the global land surface area, but it contains about 30% of the world's copper in resources. So extremely fertile with respect to copper. We all know that, but those numbers to me are pretty outstanding and pretty incredible. But even more incredible in my mind is that 75% of Chile's copper, so something in excess of 20% of the world's copper, exists in two areas of Chile. So here in the north, the area from Escondida to Collahuasi, the Eocene and Oligocene in northern Chile, and then down south in the Miocene there from Las Palambras to El Teniente. Those two areas alone contain over 20% of the world's known copper resources. So any area selection process we go through has to take into account this concept of the extreme heterogeneity of the distribution of mineral deposits. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing this in Chile or you're doing it in the US or Australia. To me, this is a concept that holds true for any deposit type. It also holds true in touched the wrong button. Holds true in the fourth dimension as well, in the temporal sense. So here I've just compiled a bunch of data, and you can see a more expanded version of this talk that I gave last year on the Ore Deposits Hub forum there. And here I've compiled the copper endowment in Peru. In this case, I've got data for elsewhere as well, over time and essentially over the lifespan of the Andean arc. Something in excess of 70 million years of potentially favourable arc. But the copper endowment is extremely focused in a small number of short periods, short fertile periods. So again, if we're undertaking our area selection, we need to take account and be trying to predict those areas that are small in spatial extent and short in temporal extent that give us the highest probabilities for discovery. And just a couple more slides on the way on some terminology here. So I just want to make sure everyone understands how I use a couple of terms. So here, and again, apologies for the Porphyry bias, but I use the term province for the largest picture, a largest version of a mineral region, if you like. And examples of the provinces here would be the North American Cordillera or the South American Cordillera here, or the Southwest Pacific, for example, in the Porphyry world, or the Tasmanides here in Eastern Australia. In my terminology, would be a province. And then if we look here over on the right in Dick and Pepe's famous diagram of South America, where they then took the Andean province and pulled it apart in terms of belts, which are both spatially and temporally defined. So here's the Eocene, Oligocene, and northern Chile and southern Peru sitting here, a spatially defined belt, and also a belt defined temporally here, the Peru segment of that. So province, belt, and then I come down into district, which will be is a smaller spatial entity and somewhat shorter temporal duration as well. And in the Porphyry world, the district is essentially the footprint of your underlying magma chamber, which is forming the deposits above itself. So that's how I would think of a district. An example of a district here in South America, in Peru, is the Las Bambas district here, where we've got multiple deposits distributed over 15 or 20 kilometres, formed from the same underlying mid-crustal magma chamber. So those are the terminology I use. And just to prove that I'm not entirely one-dimensional, I have thrown in a different example here from a bit closer to home for some of you. So in the Tasmanides here, and in this case, I'm talking about the Cobar area. So in my terminology, the Lachlan origin or the Lachlan fold belt would be the province. The belt would be the Cobar Basin, here shown in blue, and the district would be the Cobar district itself. So I think the sort of terminology is transferable from across deposit types, and there are other examples that I could have shown of that as well. So having got that out of the way, I'd like now just to move on and start to talk about some of this, some exploration case study examples that I think help to inform our discussion about risk and management of the risk. In doing these case studies, I haven't looked at every mineral discovery in the last 50 years. What I've done is I've selected ones that are where there's good information or where I have some personal knowledge, etc. Even though they're selected, I do think they're representative, but you won't see all of your favourite mineral deposits discoveries discussed here today. So firstly, looking at this sort of scale, again, on the left, we just have the USGS Porphyry data set. And essentially you can use that to define the main porphyry provinces and belts in the world. And what I find super interesting when I look at this map and I compare it to the map on the right, which is the map out of Titley and Bean in 1980 in the Economic Geology anniversary volume. And what we can see here is that in large part, our view of porphyry provinces, and I believe this is largely the case for other deposit types as well, has hardly changed in 45 years. You know, we see these same belts in 1980 as we see here today, with a few really important exceptions, both exceptions generated by data and also by discoveries, if you like. So the one exception of course would be here in northern China and Mongolia, the OT, the Devonian there in Mongolia, and the other deposits in northern Mongolia were not known about, either not discovered or there was not data in the Western literature at the time. But not a lot of differences here in the biggest sort of sense, if you like, in the last 45 years in the porphyry world. I just saw a hand floating up there, Jess. I don't know if that means there's a problem or someone...
I think it was a clap.
Oh, okay. I'm not across all the icons. I was just worried I wasn't being heard, so I'll charge on. Now, what I've done here is I've put on what I think in this next slide, what I think are probably certainly most of the significant porphyry discoveries post this Titley and Bean map. There may be a few I've missed, but I think I've got the main ones anyway. So if I look at that now, we can see, and I won't, obviously not going to go through them, but the picture you see there is that the discoveries that have come in this time have largely come within those belts that we already knew about in 1980, with again the exception here of OT, and I could have put a couple of other small ones on here as well. But one thing that I think is really important is if I flick back to and take those off for a second, we'll see that a number of the discoveries and many of the really significant ones have sort of come on the ends or outside of what Titley and Bean had, but in where you might have logically predicted those belts would extend. So if we flick back and forwards there, for example, in the Tethys, we've seen discoveries, Kishladar, for example, here in Turkey, that were not within the Titley and Bean defined belt, but geologically, if you'd done the work at the time and you had the data available, you could predict that belt went through there as it did down here to Reka Dik in Pakistan. So the challenge of exploration, at least in the porphyry world, in my mind, for the last 40 or 50 years, has really been about getting better within the belts we already knew about and looking for the opportunities in the extensions of those belts. And you'll probably get sick of me using those sorts of words here in the next half an hour or so, because it's a pretty consistent theme of what I'm going to talk about. So having started at that scale, I'm going to now look at a small number of specific discoveries. And again, these are usually ones that I have some knowledge of or that are well documented, or, for example, in the case of Kamoa, are super important. So there's not many here because we have a limited amount of time, but I do think they're fairly representative of the way discoveries have gone on in this last couple of decades. So most of you, I think, will be familiar with many of these. And what I'm going to do now is just look in a sort of a tabular fashion at some of the features that I think characterise these discoveries and how we can, and what we can take from those and how we can learn from those. So if we look here at going roughly in chronological order, so the Sepon deposit here, which was, or Sepon district, Sepon group of deposits, which was the reason that I was living in Laos for a bunch of years, was discovered in the early 1990s by CRA, as it was at the time. And it's an example, in my mind, one of the classic examples of a discovery in an extremely immature exploration province. So there was no known fertile belt in that area at the time. There was no known fertile district at the time, and this is because the data was just not in the Western literature or in the Western able to be. The country was just opening up, you know. So this was true frontier exploration type discovery. And the key things there, I think, in terms of its discovery, is CRA were the first mover, or one of the first movers with Newmont into the country there. And they had a willingness to go and do really frontier, remote reconnaissance type work. And simply by being in the country and being willing to work in the country, they had a willingness to accept that perceived extreme country risk. So to me, a great example of real frontier type stuff that led to success. It's still going now. Kamoa, jumping forward a bit, Kamoa is obviously one of the great discoveries of recent decades, and particularly when you put the Kakula part of it onto that. During the 2000s, it was a known within, or was an extension of a known fertile belt, but not within a known fertile district. And it was away, the discovery, where we know the deposit is now, is away from what was perceived to be the best part of the belt, both in terms of spatial extent and also stratigraphic position. And there'd been limited previous exploration because of its position and the shallow cover there. So to me, the key pieces there around Kamoa is that it is in the extension to the known belt, but outside of the area that was known at the time. And obviously there was a willingness to accept it, again, high perceived country risk. But critically, I think in the Kamoa example, as I think in many of these examples, excellent geological expertise, really great sort of targeting work from the team that was involved there. But just remember, I think this piece here, there was an extension to a known belt. Cascabel, another great, relatively recent discovery here in Ecuador. A known fertile belt, yes. Was it a known fertile district? Not really. The key in terms of the maturity, again, it's in a less mature extension to a known belt, but immature to the extent that there's outcropping opportunities there of really obvious porphyry style mineralisation. And so the keys there again were an early mover, adapting to an improving jurisdiction, and lots of local knowledge and an expert evaluation of that opportunity and recognising the opportunity, but again in an extension to a known belt in a less mature part of that belt. The Taylor CRD deposit here in far southern Arizona is another interesting example of variations on the theme. Well and truly within the known fertile belt, the laramide there. In a known fertile district, the Patagonia district was well known. It was two fairly substantial porphyries there. There was also skarn and CRD mineralisation known. So it's an extremely mature province. But critically, I think in that district, there was low maturity for the deposit style that ended up being the Taylor deposit. So people had been looking for porphyries, people in that area, but not necessarily looking for CRDs. And it was understanding that zoning patterns and understanding that from your really great geological expertise, understanding and recognising that opportunity and spotting what essentially was an area of low maturity in an extremely mature province and district. And that's a theme I want to come back to a little later on, is how you spot these areas, windows of low maturity in otherwise what are considered highly mature districts and provinces. And the others on this list here as we go through in sort of roughly chronological order. Hot Mardin here in northeastern Turkey, in a known fertile belt, a known fertile district. The belt's relatively mature. The local situation there at Hot Mardin also relatively mature, but there was a small window of immaturity because of some shallow cover. And so I think the keys there were that it was recognised by the right people that there was an abundance of metal in that small scale district, and the recognition that not all of the best parts and not all of the little local area had been well tested. So it was spotting that opportunity, spotting that immaturity within an otherwise very mature district. Another example, I think, of a similar sort of thing is Marimaca here in northern Chile, and the Antofagasta, the coastal belt there, within a known fertile belt, but not, in my estimation, in a known fertile district. There was certainly evidence of mineralisation in that area, but nothing of real scale too close. So it was, in my view, it was a relatively immature segment of a belt. There were some artisanal workings, but very little previous drilling. So an immature part of a known belt, and the extension to that belt. And again, the right eyes at the right time, recognising that opportunity, and in this case, a willingness to drill early and drill a lot. One of the other great discoveries of recent times, the Onto discovery here in Indonesia, a known fertile belt for sure, known fertile district. It depends, I think, probably what side of the bed you get out on any given day. There's certainly known mineralisation, extensive alteration, but nothing fertile at the sort of scale of a potentially economic deposit. So it's a bit on the fence there. But the maturity is relatively high, had been previously drilled and reasonably extensively drilled in certain places, but not in the exact location of the subsequent discovery. So the key things in my mind there around the discovery keys were recognition by, again, the right set of eyes, recognising the scale of the alteration and the nature of the alteration, and then just a willingness to drill deep and drill based on the geology. And then wrapping up one here that's not quite as well known, but let's hope it will be at some stage soon, is the Panuco silver gold district here in Sinaloa in Mexico, that I was fortunate enough to have a little bit of involvement with just recently. The discovery was made there, something in the order of 100 million ounces of silver at about 600 grams and growing every day. A known fertile belt, obviously within the heart of the Mexican silver epithermals, a known fertile district there, active mining for hundreds of years, current mining, lots of previous drilling, and the key there was the land consolidation. So being able to manage that piece around the land consolidation and recognising the opportunity that presented itself if that land consolidation could be done. Another key piece of the puzzle here was just the ability to raise the funds at a time that not everyone had that ability, and that's a theme I'll come back to in a minute. So just looking at that sort of group of selected deposit discoveries, just in summary, I think the keys there, a lot of it is the extensions to or immature parts of known belts, but also in the case of Sepon, extreme immaturity in the first mover. But I think the key theme is success often comes through the recognition of the immaturity of known belts and known districts. And just a couple of maps to illustrate those. I won't labour these, but here the Kamoa discovery sitting out here on the extension of the Great Central African Copper Belt from Zambia up through here into the DRC, and I'm sure there's people on the call that know a lot more about this than I do. Here the Cascabel example, and these are maps from SolGold, from their website. Here where they talk about, in my terminology, this is the Andean province through here, and they talk about an underexplored sector of that province. And here's their map of the belts, similar to the one we saw before. So their discovery there was, the recognition of an underexplored, a less fertile part of that belt. And the last one here, the Hot Martin discovery, is an interesting one. So sitting up here in northeastern Turkey, in a relatively fertile belt here with VMS deposits and high sulfidation gold systems here of reasonable scale, nothing world-beating until Hot Martin was found, but a relatively mature exploration environment. And at the local scale, this is actually a picture that I've taken from the hill behind the deposit. The deposit sits entirely on this little flat here, about 400 metres by 100 metres sitting in here. But this was a very well-known area pre the discovery. The discovery hole was drilled from the back of this house here with the red roof. There was a hole in the front yard of that house that had missed the deposit. So it was a really well-known sort of area, but the people that made the discovery recognised that there was still room to move here. There was still an opportunity here, and weren't put off by the fact that it had already been drilled. And I think that's important in these more mature provinces. I'm going to move a little bit closer to home for many of you here and look at some Australian examples. And again, these are selected, but we had a wave, I think, in the probably really realistically in the 50s, 60s. I've started here sort of in the 70s, where we were discovering new belts. So that started really, with the Olympic Dam discoveries, Nifty Telfer, North Park, sort of a number as it was at that time, which was really what discovered and started the Macquarie Arc. Cannington, Ernest Henry in the Eastern Succession. Even though the Eastern Succession was known to be mineralised, there were no really major deposits of those types already known at the time that those deposit discoveries were made. I personally think there's very few of these sorts of opportunities to discover new belts anywhere globally, and certainly within Australia I think it's pretty challenging. Subsequent to that, the successes have largely come from testing less mature extensions to these known fertile belts. So the ongoing successes in the Macquarie Arc with Cow and Cadia, the ongoing successes in the Stuart Shelf, Prominent Hill, Carapatina, and the ongoing successes in the Patterson, Winu and Javierto. And then, so those are coming from from largely undercover and areas of less maturity within those known belts, or and the extensions to those belts, or areas within the belts but under deeper cover. So the Tina discovery just over the road from MacArthur River there, Boda in the Macquarie Arc, where the Alkane guys made that discovery really within the well-known part of the Arc, but were prepared to do some things that others hadn't done. And the Oak Dam discovery around Olympic Dam, obviously a willingness to continue to drill and drill deep. And in my view, this upsets people when I say this, but in my view, the Macquarie Arc is Australia's only fertile porphyry belt, and that's why it's continued to deliver these exploration successes over multiple years. And we can see a timeline here of Macquarie Arc success from the initial discoveries at North Parks right through to recent discoveries at Boda, and ongoing exploration in the belt by a number of companies, including one which I'm involved in, which has large areas of the extension of the belt there operating on this same philosophy that I've been talking about. So having talked then about exploration case studies and some successes, I want to talk about this concept of multi-layered risk. So I think about exploration as a business of layers, and I use the term risk. You can equally flip that around if you're a glass half full kind of person and call it multi-layer opportunity. And for me, there's a number of things that constitute those layers. The first one is safety. I think we all recognise in this day and age that safety is the overarching risk that we need to manage, and the key question there is, will your team be in danger? And if the answer to that question is yes, then to me, you manage that risk by going somewhere else. You don't even contemplate that. But then if we start to build up these other layers, what are the layers that I think go into successful exploration strategies and the things that you need to think about and manage? First one is your financial risk, and simply put, if you don't have the money, you won't find anything. So you need to have strategies for managing your financial risk. Technical risk, is it there and can I find it? So right at the start I said, if your area selection is selecting areas where there are no undiscovered mineral deposits, then you won't find one. So the technical risk is the base layer here of your risk profile. Commodity risk. Is your choice of commodity likely to increase or decrease your risk? So for example, are you working in a commodity where it's going to become increasingly difficult to achieve finance, and therefore your chances of success will be reduced? Or were you lucky and were you in lithium a little while ago, and you've got all the finance in the world, and you can have very high. If you manage all these other risks, then your commodity risk is an opportunity there. Jurisdictional risk. If you find an ore body, do you get to keep it? And that's important, obviously, for the financial side of things and the investor side of things, but it actually doesn't really impact on your exploration discovery success rates, but it's super important, obviously, for your investors. Land access risk. Can you get access? If you can't get access to your best targets, you can't get access to your area, then of course your exploration probabilities are going to be very low. So that's a risk that needs to be understood and managed very well. Technology risk. Has an advance in technology reduced your risk? So here I'm talking about breakthroughs in discovery-oriented technology, whether it be geophysics, whether it be geochemistry or drilling technology, etc. If you're on top of those areas and you can act on those things fast, then you can get a competitive advantage over your peers by acting on those advances and reducing your technical risk. Your operational risk. Can you work efficiently in this particular area? If you're unable to work efficiently, if your costs are super high or you're having trouble getting access for various reasons, then your probabilities will also decrease, and you've got to take that into account and manage your portfolio so that you're operating in areas that give you the best chance of being able to operate effectively and therefore improve your probabilities of success. One that I've left to last here that I think is super important is what I call attitudinal risk. So here it's about the people in your organisation. So are you and your team and your organisation motivated and organised in such a way to maximise your probabilities of success? So if you're not of that sort of ilk and your organisation is not structured well, then that really has an impact on your exploration probabilities. So having sort of presented those, what I want to do now is give you my view of where those priorities lie. So in my view, within that list that I've talked about there, the winner is the technical risk. And that's again around this concept, if it's not there, you can't find it. So you have to make, in my view, for successful exploration programs, you have to make managing and understanding the technical risks, understanding the technical aspects has to be your number one priority. And I think of technical risk in terms of three areas: fertility, maturity, predictability, and detectability. And I've got a slide, the next slide talks to that. And you manage your technical risk by the choices you make in these three categories, and I'll talk to you about how I go about doing that. And in my view, the second prize, in terms of our multi-layered risk profile for exploration, goes to financial risk. If you don't have the money, you won't find anything. And the more money that you have available to do your exploration, if you're managing all those other risks, well, the better chance you have, the higher your probabilities of success are. And so here, I think there's an opportunity both for individuals. If you're a seriously motivated explorationist and you want to get out there and put yourself in the best place to make and be involved in discoveries, align yourself with reliable, consistent sources of funding. So those can be the majors or intermediate-sized companies that have an exploration-focused attitude, or if you prefer, into the junior or private sectors that have the ability to consistently fund through cycles, or at least fund their projects early in cycles. And so these are the sorts of places you need to be aligning yourself. And if you're creating an organisation, then you need to be at least as focused on your financial status and your ways of financing through periods such as we're going through now to maximise your chances of exploration success. And finally, I think that rounding out the top three is this concept of organisational structure and individual motivation. If you and your organisation aren't motivated and structured in an appropriate way, your probabilities of success drastically decrease. And as I say here, with apologies to Gary Player, he said, the more I practice, the luckier I get. And I think in terms of exploration success, the more motivated you are, the luckier you're going to get. It's possible to be lucky, but not consistently lucky, I think. And I think in my experience, motivated teams problem solve and they seek solutions, they look for opportunity, they act and they work hard, and these are the teams that have the highest chance of being successful. If we just quickly now talk about how I think about that hierarchy of technical risk, because as I said, in my view, technical risk is the number one thing we need to deal with, and it's therefore managing that and doing the best job you can at managing your technical risk gives you the best chance of being successful. So I think of technical risk in this sort of three-layered hierarchy here. Fertility, so simply put, has a deposit formed in this area? And if the answer to that is no, i.e. we've got a cross here, then you need to go back to the drawing board and go away, because you have zero chance of finding a deposit if there's not one there. So if your answer is that I predict that there is a high probability that a deposit has formed in that area, then your next question is, what's my exploration maturity? So has that deposit already been found? And quite clearly, if the answer to that is you think likely yes, that the deposits have already been found, i.e. you've got very high exploration maturity, then again you need to go back to the drawing board and go somewhere else and have a think. And then if your answer to that is no, i.e. you think the deposit is still there undiscovered, it comes down to your view of how predictable and detectable that deposit is in that given environment. And if you think you can predict that deposit effectively and you can detect it with your tools available, whether those tools be your hammer and your hand lens or some fancy geophysical technique, it doesn't matter. If you think in the environment you're operating in, you have the ability to be predictive and detect known deposits, then away you go, you get your boots on and you go exploring. So those are the steps that I would go through in any area to determine whether I'm going to continue exploring or whether I'm out. And in terms of the fertility piece, it being the number one important piece of the technical risk, which itself I think is the number one risk in exploration, I think of managing fertility risk and assessing fertility risk in this sort of hierarchy here. So we need to be placing ourselves in fertile belts, and those can be the extensions of those belts. That's the best place to be, is predicting the extensions of those fertile belts. And within those fertile belts, I believe we need to be putting ourselves in fertile trends. So trends, use whatever language you want to, and if you're a structural geologist, use structural terms. I think we don't understand a lot about what some of these fertile trends are, but they are real and they are across deposit types. And if you can identify fertile trends within fertile belts, such here as the Cananea Silver Belt trend in northern Mexico and southern Arizona, and here is the Patagonia district where that Taylor CRD deposit was discovered there a number of years ago, in the heart of that fertile trend. The other thing that's super important in my mind, and some people get sick of me banging on about this, but is fertile times, fertile periods within those fertile belts. So if you can find yourself in the sweet spot of a fertile trend in fertile times, then you have the ability to potentially be predicting fertile districts, and they become your exploration scale sort of opportunity. So that's how I sort of think about trying to manage and understand this hierarchy of fertility that feeds into our assessment of the technical risk of what we're doing. The second part of that, my technical hierarchy, was the maturity assessment. And I guess one thing to remember is that exploration maturity can only go one direction. We can't go backwards. So exploration, unfortunately, is only ever going to get harder. It's going to get harder from a maturity perspective. And in my mind, accurate assessment of maturity is extremely difficult and needs to be done with care. Abundant examples exist of discoveries within systems and districts that have been previously drilled. And those discoveries, such as Acadia, the initial discoveries in 1992, Acadia, the Martin, Boda, Onto, Panuca, all of these and a host of others that I could rattle off, all were made within districts that had already been drilled and the districts that were already known. So it's really easy to overestimate maturity. And I think so we can also sort of just look at brownfields discoveries. So we all can name endless numbers of brownfields discoveries over years. And to me, that proves that fertility wins every day, because we keep making discoveries in the same areas, and those are very mature areas by definition. But we keep making discoveries, so that's evidence to me that it's very easy to overestimate exploration maturity. And in more mature belts, success is likely to come undercover in those extensions, and we've talked about some of these examples. There's some more here in South and North America. But these are where your detectability and operational risks become significant. So if you are under such deep cover, even if you have a high degree of confidence that you're in an extension to a fertile belt, hopefully on a fertile trend, but if you have real trouble detecting that deposit, whether it just be a drilling challenge, let alone a geophysical or geochemical challenge, then your probabilities of success will drop rapidly, as will the same thing happen if your operational risks are very high. The other place that exploration success comes in mature belts is by recognising these overlooked opportunities, and we talked about there a minute ago in Marimaca in Chile. But these are not easy. They require detailed study and the correct eyes. In my view, frontier areas always will carry higher jurisdictional, operational, safety and land access risk. So these need to be carefully assessed against the proper maturity analysis. And it's very easy to overestimate the maturity in parts of belts. And the movement into frontier area exploration areas, in my mind, is most strongly justified, or really can only be justified, if you have a high degree of confidence around your fertility prediction. So if you're pushing into a frontier area, you're accepting all of these other risks. In my mind, you need to have a really high, or you need to have a high degree of confidence that at least you have some fertility confidence there, that you're in the right part of the world, that that potentially there's a deposit there to be found. So in summary, around the maturity, be very careful about your maturity assessment, because it's extremely easy to overestimate maturity and put too much effort and budget into frontier areas, in my mind. And a little, one way of summarising that is we all know great belts and great districts keep on giving. So we keep finding things in these belts, and that to me is evidence that maturity is easily overestimated. So just wrapping up now, the last couple of slides, in terms of how you can go about putting all of these things together and making some decisions around your exploration portfolio and your exploration approaches. So here I've just put together some examples. These are sort of real examples that I've redacted of looking at belt scale. So each of these is a country and belts within that country here, where there are multiple belts are named, with a kind of a traffic light sort of system here for advising and determining whether a particular organisation should put some effort into these countries and these belts. But it's very important to recognise that for every investor or every organisation, the profile of these will look different. Some organisations will accept different risks compared to others. But it needs to be done at the belt scale, and then the non-technical risks, those land access risks, etc., need to be done at a very local scale, and it's going to be different for everyone. So for example, here just pulled out an example where we have, for this organisation, this was one that needed to have some deeper study. But for another organisation, we're saying here that there may be opportunities for staking. There may be, it's an immature part of a particular Paleocene belt. Maybe there's opportunity for another group. This might be a bridge too far in terms of the, for example, the community risk or the government risk. Here in another example, because of high government community relations and even security in this example, even though we're predicting it's an extension to a fertile belt, for some organisations, this particular organisation, that might be a bridge too far. So you've got to do all of this assessment at the belt scale, at the local scale for your non-technical risks, and then for your particular organisation. There's no cookie cutter approach to this. And so just last slide, just to wrap up. In my view, our multi-layer risk sort of strategies here in exploration, personal safety risk is not negotiable. You need to make sure your people are safe. Don't even argue about that. In my view, the technical risk is the highest risk. So you need to focus on those fertile trends and fertile periods within those fertile belts. That gives you the highest probability of success. Exploration maturity is often overestimated, so look very hard, work hard to identify those less mature segments and extensions to your fertile belts, trends and periods. Then overlay your jurisdiction, your land access, all those other things on top of that. And remember that these operational land access risks can be very local, so you've got to work hard to understand that as well. And personally, if you're motivated and you want to make discoveries, put yourself in the right place. If you're fortunate enough to be in a good place to create organisations, create ones with this attitude. Or if you're a younger person, join organisations that you see are motivated, funded and well structured for exploration success. So, thank you very much for that.